Welcome, Royal Family. You tuned into Healing Queens, the podcast, where the focus is motivation, support, and guidance for the growth of our queens and kings. I'm Emma E2K, your certified healing life coach. Welcome, everybody. It is episode 72. 72. And this is sponsored by healingqueens.org, healingqueens.org, E2K Worldwide LLC, and Latino Film Club. And if you are interested in sponsoring any of these episodes, please hit us up at healingqueens@gmail.com. That's healingqueens@gmail.com. So I'm going right into it. It's been a minute since I've talked about this topic. And so the topic is depression, right? I want to talk about it. I go into it, but I don't want to talk about this topic alone. So I invited actually one of the kings. Yes. Everybody's like, well, you're going to have a king up there. Well, I'm just to let you know, I've been listening. And I brought this king that is qualified to talk about this topic. And the reason why I say that is because I was following him on, of course I follow him on social media, but I was following him and he had posted something that kind of made me do one of these, like, okay, wait a minute. I think that's a podcast, right? We need to talk about it. And I reached out to him and I was like, are you willing to get on the podcast and talk about it? Because I noticed, ladies, men don't like to be talking about their stuff, right? Like they don't really want to be talking about any topic that's serious. But he was like, what? Yes, let's do it. Let's go. So I'm like, okay, let's not hesitate. Let's do this. So finally, from his busy schedule, I got to get him on. Please, everybody, welcome Vega. So the
What's
reason
up,
why
everybody?
I'm introducing Vega as Vega, but you're going to get to know a lot about Vega, everything he's doing. He's doing so much stuff that I'll be here. I think it'll take the whole podcast by the time I say everything he does. But the main thing, how I get, I don't care who's here. The main thing I want to talk about is that topic. And the topic is depression, because it's wonderful that he's here and he's going to give his male perspective on it and his own personal, journey. Because a lot of us think, oh, we're too famous or we're too rich or we're too whatever for depression to ever hit us. Everyone, including yourself, everyone, has dealt with depression. But how have you dealt with it, right? Are you still dealing with it? Like, what are the tools that you use to be able to help you cope with that? And so I was just interested because I've never on the air have spoken to another king that has touched the topic. Off the air, they'd be like, oh, Emma, this and that. I'm like, can I get you on the air? Or Vega was bold enough, because Vega, he keep it funky. He's from New York. You don't play that. So I got Vega here. I got another Latino here to represent. Vega, welcome to the show. You already know how we give it up here in Healing Queens. We're all about the motivation, the empowerment. We like to talk about the topic, but not just talk about depression and depressed people. We want to talk about depression and then give people some tools on how you cope with it. What was it that you have posted that interested me to even reach out to you about it? But before you even go into that, please introduce yourself and give your accolades, because man, you've been doing a lot. I see you. Please salute to you, because you are doing it. Like, you are really doing it. So introduce yourself. Let my audience know.
Just doing the best I can. You know what I'm saying? My name is Vega Montanez. Vega Montañez for the Latinos is gonna yell at me later. I have the privilege of being a film writer, director, sound designer by trade and most practice, but writer, director, producer, with a couple of projects available and a few more that are coming out soon, and some in festivals that are doing really amazing right now, which is super exciting.
I'm not letting you run through that with a couple of projects. You better know the projects. What do you mean a couple of projects?
My interestingly enough, it's funny that we're talking about this again, because for me again, because my very first film, The Hurt We Share, is available on Tubi now. And that movie was actually about mental health, suicide, and depression. and inspired by a friend who took their own life. So
Mm.
it's so, and I think that that's like a really heavy element of what depression really encompasses. You know what I'm saying? Versus like everybody goes through waves of sadness. You should go through waves of sadness. They help to really amplify the value of the good parts. But I think that, well, not that I think, it's well documented and medically proven that there's a certain percentage of people who really do just suffer from this constant state of being lost in like this darkness. And unfortunately, I'm one of those people, right? Where even with all of the accolades that we're receiving, it's there's just days and moments and months at a time or weeks at a time where you just kind of self isolate. And you just find yourself, and I describe it that way because I feel like there's a lot of people out there who haven't had the opportunity to go and find out if something's wrong with them, or they haven't made the effort to, right? Or maybe they're scared to. So if you're doing any type of self-diagnosis, right, like not encouraged, of course, but these are just kind of some of the things that I know I go through that I'm like, oh, all right, we're going through one of those moments again, and we just gotta really push through it, right? And it's the self-isolation, the lack of interest in anything, right? Where like I'll go weeks at a time where one moment I love everything I do, and the next moment I just don't care. Like nothing feels enjoyable or pleasurable or exciting. Everything just kind of feels the same, and that's when I know that I'm going through a wave, right? And to kind of cope with that, the hardest part is you can't really cope with it until you catch it. And sometimes you don't catch it for 2-3 weeks. You know what I mean? When you realize, oh wow, like I've been invited to 5 or 6 things and I've gone to zero, right? Like I have only left my house to walk the dog. Like I actually haven't really talked to anybody. Like I answer quick business questions, but I'm not actually engaging with people. And thankfully, you can catch yourself every now and then, right? And that's kind of the post that you're alluding to was for me personally catching myself and documenting it, right? And like putting it in a position where I'm like, this is the exact moment that I took awareness, right? Sometimes it's music, sometimes it's writing, sometimes it is social media, right? As much as people say social media is not important, the outrage that people are having over TikTok would say otherwise.
Wow, yeah. That's another podcast, though. That's a whole different podcast, but yes. Yes.
It's a whole other topic.
Yes.
But social media is super important, right? Because as someone who very, very openly will say, like, I don't like social media, I don't enjoy it, right? However, it doesn't take away from the fact that it impacts us, right? Like seeing your friends happy in their romantic relationship, that's going to have an impact on you. The only way it doesn't is if you're not on social media at all because you're not seeing those moments. But it's no different than going to the corner store and seeing your neighbor with their family and having that gut reaction where you're like, oh man, am I missing my time? Am I right? Like all those little thoughts that come into your mind. And I think it's, it took a long time to get to this place, but it's okay to feel those things, and when you feel them, it's just important to express it, and so that's what that post was. It was kind of just like, unfortunately, some of the stuff that happened in Vegas didn't go to plan, so that kind of like piled onto what was already happening. But leading into it, right, like the week leading into me going to Vegas to meet with the UFC and a couple different businesses out there to network and talk about partnering on different film ideas and things like that. A lot of those plans didn't really pan out, but even the week leading into it, I was already getting into that spell where I was kind of like, damn, I'm feeling myself losing interest in engaging with people. And this whole trip is about engaging with people. So this isn't just like a nervousness thing. This is a moment that's taking over. And so being out there, like it was cool as hell. Like I'm hanging out with UFC fighters that I've been a fan of for so long in my life. Like I'm getting treated like family by guys like Javi Torres and Waldo Cortez, and we're hanging out. But in the back of my mind, there's like this little itch, a little voice. It's just like, you don't belong here. You know what I'm saying? You should be back at home, sitting like just you don't belong in this environment. You don't fit in with these people, right? Like, and meanwhile, the whole time, like I'm really on the other side of the spectrum, having the time of my life and should be feeling that in my mind as well.
Right.
So that post was getting back home and just kind of looking through the pictures and going, damn, like this should have felt like the greatest time of all time. And it just felt like a good time. And it not happened, not because of anything that happened or any of the people I was with, just because this is just something I struggle with, and sometimes you just got to accept that.
Right. I like what you said about catching it, right? And being aware of it, right? Because a lot of people they kind of aware of it, but they're like, nah, it can't be me. Like that's not, I can't be depressed because I got all this money in the bank, or I'm so popular, like that depression can't hit me, but it can hit anybody, right? Rich or poor, like that doesn't matter. Like it's not about the status. And I can't even pinpoint one thing because everybody's kind of journey is different why they're depressed, right? It could be somebody that's still single and is looking at married couples and like, man, this is something I really want. Or children, or they have a new bike or a car or a business, or it can be, so it depends on the person's journey. It also could depend on a person's old trauma that they haven't dealt with, and all of a sudden now it's popping up because certain things are triggering it. And so that confusion about why all of a sudden I'm feeling this way when I see the color purple, or when I exit the train or whatever, because there's certain triggers that hit us, certain smells, certain places, locations that take us back to certain traumas. And it's just a whole compiling mess where now you're like, oh, I don't know, I'm tired, I don't want to go. Like you said, people invite you places you don't want to go, and you start isolating yourself, and you start not picking up the phone, not answering the text, not, and more where you're like asking yourself, like, why don't I want to talk to people? Like, what's wrong?
Right. And that was a lot of like, for, where we're going into the middle of March, and I would say most of January and a strong part of February was that for me, right? Where on top of just going through one of these like phases, as I say, right, there were also other things in real time that were actually happening that were bad, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm having this imaginary bad stuff happening in my mind that's just telling you, oh my God, bad stuff is happening everywhere. Right. And then one bad thing happens and it kind of confirms that thought, and it just digs you into a deeper hole, right? So for the beginning of this quarter, I was really in a space where I just didn't want to pick up the phone because I was like, oh, like my mind's telling me bad things are happening. I already see this one bad thing. Every time I pick up the phone, it's going to be bad things. I'm not picking up the phone. Right. Like that's how you start to rationalize things. Right. And when you come out of it, you realize like none of your rationalizations made any sense. Right. But they're just like someone running for fear, right? Like someone will run directly into the ocean if they're running from something they're afraid of. But like that's just as bad of a situation. Right. Like, neither one is actually good. Right. Right. And I think that the comparison and where we are as a generation, I think, you know how they say too much of a good thing could also be bad, right? So I feel like we might have reached that space in mental health where too much of the good thing is us telling too many people to think about their mental health, where now we like, and I'll speak for myself, right? Where I know myself to be uncomfortable talking about, or not to be uncomfortable talking about it. I'm always comfortable talking about it, but bringing up what I feel, I tend to get uncomfortable because it like now it feels like it's starting to become a bother, right? Not me personally being a bother, but the amount of people now talking about their mental health in every environment you go to, as opposed to it's starting to feel like it's a cool buzz thing as opposed to being something people are actually trying to work through. So you'll be at a cafe and you hear people, oh, I'm so depressed, and they're talking through this thing, and it's like, I don't want to judge your situation, but it feels like it's a very surface level thing. And it's okay to recognize the difference between sadness and depression. Right. There are people who are diagnosed depressed and they spend most of their life feeling this deep depression. There are people who go through phases. There are people who are just experiencing a sad moment. And I think that we've gone so far into correcting people being afraid to go to therapy that now everything is an encouragement to go to therapy.
Every
You know what I mean?
emotion.
And I think
Yeah.
that it's like I spilled my coffee. I needed 3 days off from work because I got to go to therapy. And it's like, slow down. Slow
Right.
down. We need to also
We'll
learn
just
how
get
to
you another
deal with
cup. We'll just
emotion.
get you
You
another
know
cup.
what I mean?
But you gotta go to work. You gotta
Yeah.
pay for this
Yeah,
cup.
like, let's not panic. Right. You know? So, but then on the flip side of that, I also feel like just because I say this as like a phrase all the time, I understand there are people starving all around the world. That doesn't change that I'm hungry right now. You know
Mm,
what I'm saying? So so from the other side of the
good.
comparison, it's like, yeah, I get that other people's life might be a lot worse, but this thing I'm experiencing is the worst for me.
Right.
And
It's
that's
real.
okay. Like you got to be able to, yeah, that's your
Right.
life. You're feeling that.
It's real. It's real for
Um,
you. It's real for you. Yeah.
mhm.
Wow. That right there is powerful. And again, thank you for even wanting to discuss it and talk about it, because even with it being okay to speak about your mental health and all that, I know as far as from men's perspective, right, especially from New York, we ain't raised to be talking about our emotions and our feelings. It's like suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah.
Keep it moving. Whatever. And so,
The East Coast is quick to call you sassy.
and that's horrible, because and then you have to be like,
Yeah.
and our generation, I want to say 30s, 40s, 50s. The reason why we're messed up now is because of that. Because we were never given the opportunity to
Mhm.
really speak on stuff. We really had to just zip it and deal with it, deal with PTSD on the low, deal with, mental issues on the low, and not say nothing, and all it's gotten is worse and worse. And then we look at the news and we see everything happening, and really, should you wonder? I mean, come on.
Right. Right.
I tell you, I'm grateful. I'm very grateful for my life and that I'm here. A lot of those around me didn't make it here. Um, and,
Mhm.
and, and some of them are 6 feet under, but some of them are still just walking dead because they're not here.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And it's
Just
so,
repeating a pattern.
just
Yeah.
repeating and repeating because they won't seek help. To them, there's nothing wrong with them drinking on 40s in the corner and just doing nothing with your life. It's not wrong, because that's what they seen their dad and their uncles do and everybody around the neighborhood, and it's okay for you to do that, and a lot of other
Yep.
things that are not okay, but we've made it okay. And in my mind, there's a lot of things that I've seen that I shouldn't see, that I can't unsee now, that they made it okay. And now that I look, I'm like, I've been caught to say, why you being so soft or whatever? That so what? I've seen somebody get stabbed. I see somebody, and then I catch myself like, wow, the fact that I'm comfortable
Right.
with that is a problem. The
Mhm.
fact that I'm telling somebody else, oh, why you getting so hysterical? It was just a fire. It was just, he only got $150. Why would I be comfortable even, like
Right.
advocating for that?
You start to question yourself, right? And like your own
Yeah.
level of humanity when you're looking at certain things and you're like, wow, this thing doesn't, like, I was having that conversation with a friend recently because I was telling them a story. I guess I'll share it with your audience too. I had a moment, and I know we're running out of time, so I'll end it here. But I had a moment a couple weeks ago where after the situation took place, I kind of had a self-reflective moment. I was like, oh my God, like this was another example of a part of me that's broken, but not in a like, oh my God, life's gonna fall apart way, but just like this part of me as a human isn't working the same way it works for others.
Mm.
Right. So I was walking the dog. We came across this strange guy who's, you could tell, wasn't from the neighborhood, right? Um, and as we're walking by, he starts talking to the dog. The dog takes off because, for whatever reason, my dog just does not like crackheads. It is the craziest thing. As soon as he sees them, he takes off running. It's freaking amazing. So he did that. So immediately he runs off. I know what I'm dealing with. But the guy got strange, right? He started asking where we lived and starts following me. He was standing still when we got to him, and now suddenly he's following me, right? And he's following us through these narrow alleys that we're walking through, right? And so at one point, I just turned around and confronted him, and we're having this back and forth. And I'm like, just go about your business, do what you got to do. And so now he's walking in front of us. We get to one more really narrow kind of space, and he comes to a complete stop and starts reaching in his bag, right? And so I'm like, yo, I don't know what's going on here, but I already asked you to get out of the project, so like you got to keep moving. And so he reaches in his bag and grabs a scissor. Now, in real time, I'm just like, bro, I don't know what you think is going to happen with that scissor, but let's just like reconsider your life. And, unfortunately, it did get a little physical, had to protect myself or whatever. But after the whole moment transpires, I'm moving on with the day. And the moment kind of struck me as it's kind of crazy that throughout all of that, I didn't have a moment of fear, right? Like there wasn't a moment in me where my fight or flight was like, get out of here, And then when you think further about the situation, it's like, no, it's not that I'm tough. It's that there's something wrong with me because there's no realistic situation where what I did made sense.
Right.
The man is clearly homeless.
Right.
He's clearly a crackhead. He has literally nothing left to lose.
Right.
And instead of going about my day, I engaged it. Right. So it's like, what is happening in my world that puts me in that space, right? And then again into the time space of when this takes place, it's like, oh right, I'm also in the middle of this depressive spell where I'm not engaging with people socially. So I'm also forgetting social cues and typical interactions you have, right? So like all these moments, and I say that to say that growing up in the hood or urban environments or dangerous environments, because country shit gets crazy too, is really a factor in life. Like that really gives you a whole different way that you operate in life, right? Like another reference I made was like people who have been to prison. They are some of the most respectful people you will ever see in the real world because the world they come from, if you disrespect someone, you get punched in the face. If you disrespect someone, you get stabbed. Like that is a whole other world. So when they're in our world, yeah, there's a reason they react the way they do if you bump into them, because in the world they come from, it's a whole other situation. You know what I mean?
It's a whole different mental process with that. So let me ask you something.
It's a whole other.
How have you been coping? Like, what are your tools that you use once you kind of see like, okay, it's happening, this is happening, I already know I'm staying home, I'm not doing it. What do you do that's different, or how do you help yourself out of that?
So one of the big things for me is when I fall into my spaces, one of the biggest things that happens is isolation. So like I get super isolated, or like I said, I could go days without leaving the house for anything other than taking the dog out. And so when I catch it, the very first thing I do is start booking things for me to be at, right? Because if I commit to going to things, especially if I commit to going to things for people that I know or with people that I know, I feel like that the level of guilt sometimes is enough to override whatever it is I'm feeling. Yeah, that accountability to be there will force me to go, and then just trying to force myself to be more outside, more extroverted, right? I'm not an introvert. I'm one of those ambiverts, or like I'm good with either side.
Right.
But depressed me is 100% introvert, has zero interest in being anywhere else. Right? So once I catch it, I'm like, oh, no, I got to start putting stuff on the calendar. I got to start making phone calls. And I just come up with any reason to just find things that force me out of the house.
Right.
Not to say I'm enjoying it or that it changes the way I feel, but it changes the environment I'm in, right? Which helps with, I smoke weed, as a lot of people know, right? But when I'm depressed, like it is chain smoking. And that's not good, right? So even if it's just breaking out of the environment where I'm just sitting in the same space, chain smoking, and now I go to a space where I'm not smoking at all for 5 or 6 hours, right? Like that is helpful.
Right. Breaking the monotony.
Breaking it up, because I'm getting too accustomed and too comfortable with the same, kind of stagnant dryness that's taking place.
But the point is taking
But
action.
there's no like instant solution. Yeah, some sort of action has to
Some
be
sort of
taken, right? And
action.
you have to figure out for yourself what is the action,
What does that?
right? Another thing I noticed when I'm really down, I don't cook as much. Like I love cooking. When I'm down, I just don't really care. Like so, it's helpful that I cook all of my dog's food, so I have to cook, right? So like if I fall into that space and I'm not cooking, he reminds me I'm not
Right.
cooking.
Tell us what you stir, but you're not the only one that eats.
Right, you know.
I think that's why women that have children, like we're able to cope with that depression a little more because we have to feed them and
Right.
clothe them and take them to school, and like these things have to be done, and kind of gives us less time to kind of marinate in the depression, not to say that there's no men that
Well,
don't do that either, but for the
but
most
on
part.
the men's side, the typical thing is they're the breadwinner. They're expected to be out doing the work, the socializing,
Right.
and networking, whatever it takes to get that money home. So when they fall into the depression, and again, I'll speak for myself, right? It does present a moment where you're like, I I can't talk to anybody right now because I need to fix some things before I can even expose to you how broken things are. Like,
Right.
like
Wow.
I got to get to a level where I'm comfortable telling you how bad this situation is.
Right.
But until I'm there, like I just have to deal with this bad stuff on my own. And the only person I really have to hold accountable is me. Because like you said, if you're in the goal family situation where it's husband, wife, kids, even if the husband falls into a depression, the wife is still holding everything down in the household. So
Right.
he can isolate,
Right.
right? He can disappear because he doesn't have to cook. He's not, right? Even though those duties are super well split, right? There's just that dynamic between men and women where we understand each other and we understand that discomfort that creates space, right? And so all of those elements come into play, I think.
Well, Baker, we have to do a part two of this. We definitely have to do a part two because we just all we did was touch the surface. But what I did want to bring home and clear about this episode is that if you're a man and you're experiencing depression, still do take some sort of action. Don't just not take any action. Like whatever it is that you feel you're doing the most of, you don't want to do certain things, try to do the opposite, but take an action, call somebody, reach out, write, be creative, get into your creativeness, whatever that may look like to you. Even if you want to stay away from people for whatever reason, but get creative in some sort of way, clean, cook, find a new hobby. Like the point is do something, just don't do
Yep.
nothing. Any last words?
And it's funny. It's actually super funny because if you think about it, right, like the least manly thing you could do in a depressive state is not take action because men take action. Like,
Come on. King salute. All right,
crazy.
take action, take control, and take control, take action. That's a good one. I think we're gonna leave it there. We're letting the kings know, man, take action. There's nothing easy. Everything is hard, everything is a process. But what we do know is that we're never gonna give up because giving up is not an option. So if you're seeking, if you don't want to seek professional help because that's not your thing, then find a good tribe, find a good village of people that will support you, that will champion around you, that will pray for you, that will non-judgmental, that are not judgmental, and you can have a conversation and just let things out. So thank you, Vega, for joining us.
My pleasure.
For just being vulnerable yourself, and sharing your life, because I know that as a king, we don't do that often, but if we don't expose our stuff, how can we heal, right? So
Right.
next time,
Truthfully, that's a big element for me. And that's why I said yes, because it's like
yes,
sometimes I just need to like, sometimes what I'm saying is through me to me, right? So I'm saying these things and I'm gonna hear it back and be like, damn,
right.
you need to really listen, bro. Like, what are you doing?
And so we say, kings heal. Please continue your healing journey, and we love you. We're praying for you. Until next time, thank you, everybody. Peace.